Imagine, just for a second, what your life would be like if you stopped doubting yourself, if you stopped living on autopilot and started to push the boundaries of what you believed you were capable of in your career and in your life. Welcome to episode 57 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today, I am joined by coach Lucia DeMarco, founder of Danceify, and today she shares her vision of empowering women to be extraordinary, both in their personal lives and in their careers. So I would love to hear your feedback on my conversation with Lucia, and you can reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com. You can DM me at eugene.leeway on Instagram, or you can shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. Thank you, and I really hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with Lucia DeMarco. Welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
One thing that I always like to start with coaches, Lucia, is that we tend to follow a similar pattern. And that's that we have this rock bottom or this turning point in our lives. That's like a moment of realization that we need to change something. And somewhere along this journey of growth and development, some of us get the spark or the vision that brings us to coaching, that we want to serve others. And whether that's just one step of our personal growth and development, or maybe we just don't want others to experience the pain that we went through. So what was that like for you? And why do you do what you do?
Okay, thank you for asking. Good question. Hitting rock bottom. Oh, blimey, that's that's a story. So I think it took a while to really hit rock bottom because there's a lot of denial on our journey. I have always been fascinated as a youngster about the idea of freedom, what it means to be free. So I was always challenging as a young child. I would challenge a lot. I would challenge the status quo, people's ideas, etc., etc. So I thought that I was kind of on the right path, that I was being true to myself, but that's the denial, because there was a part of me that I wasn't really giving space to. I was making a lot of compromises, and I then got into a situation where I was starting to shut down a little bit because I was really starting to be fed with certain ideas from certain people about career choices and to take safer career options as opposed to the option of working with people, helping people. I've always been interested in education. So I was teaching and also developing my artistic work, because art has always been the backbone in everything that I've done. So that's been mainly dance, but also other artistic pursuits, theatre and drawing, painting, designing, that kind of thing. But I was starting to move away from my teaching work, which I loved, but I didn't want to do it full time because it didn't fulfill me as it used to. So I really started to focus on my passions and my interests, things that I really, really was inspired to do. And we're talking about 15 years ago. Prior to that, I had been traveling a lot and studying dances in different cultures and different countries around the world. And I was starting to develop a new discipline called Danceify. And I was using that art of dance to empower women to move their passions, to move their ideas, to move and express themselves through the body, through dance. And it started to become quite popular, and I was starting to tour quite a bit and giving lots of workshops, and I started pulling away from my dance work. And then my family were really starting to question what I was doing, because it wasn't a career choice that would give the certainty, the financial certainty. So I was being challenged to not do that. And I was starting to take it on board. I was like, okay, I get it. I get it. You're absolutely right. So I was putting it to one side and doing a little bit, just kind of compromising. And this went on for quite a few years. And it got to a point where I started developing asthma. I couldn't breathe some days. It got so bad. And when I started dancing, I could actually breathe again. And I was thinking, how interesting. It's like, it's there, but then it goes away at the same time. So I knew there was something in that, but I still didn't fully wake up to it. And this went over many, many years, to a point that my breathing condition, let's call it a condition, got worse. And then I got diagnosed with a rare form of lung disease, which was like, oh my goodness, didn't realize it was that bad. And that's when I had a wake-up call. It was like, okay, you could potentially die, Lucia. What have you got to lose? So that's when I had this illuminating moment. And it was that my body had always been talking to me, and our bodies always talk to us. I've always been fascinated with the body and how it does everything in its everything possible to speak to us and to show us certain things particularly that aren't going well, or you're on the wrong path. And it talks to different parts of the body for different people. And for me, it's always been the lungs. I've noticed it's hit that organ there. And it got so bad that that's when I had to make some radical changes in my life. I was like, okay, now I need to take some big risks. And those big risks are turning my back on my support system, I would call it, and take that risk. I could, lose a relationship from really turning my back on what others' expectations were of me. But then I thought I had nothing to lose, because I had this illness that was potentially compromising my life. And it's interesting because I was at a point where I'd been on medication for a couple of months, cortisone, quite strong cortisone. And I don't know if you've ever been on cortisone, but it's a pretty harsh drug, and it doesn't leave you feeling very well. And I decided to take a risk. I'm like, okay, I don't feel good on these drugs. I'm going to go off them. So I took myself off them, and I went back to the remedies that I normally work with, so homeopathic and anthroposophical medicines and herbs and things like that. But I had stopped them because the condition got so bad. So that's when I resorted to the cortisone. So I stopped the cortisone. That was a personal choice. I'm not advocating that people should stop taking medicines when they have illnesses, but it was a personal choice. And I had to make a radical decision in my life. And that was to be totally independent of what others thought, even if that meant risking certain relationships. And I was willing to take that risk, and I did. And I am where I am today because of that risk that I took. And yes, there's a lot of information that I haven't put in there because it's quite personal. But I took a risk, and I'm glad I did, because if I didn't, I don't know if I'd be here today. And I certainly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And that's for sure. And my motto has always been, and will always be, and it's always been like my guiding star, that if I have to do something and I'm pondering whether to do it or not, I ask myself, Lucia, will you regret it if you don't do it? And I often say yes. Okay, live life with no regrets. So I'm going to do it. Sometimes I don't know how, but somehow I'll do it. To not leave a trail of regrets in my biography, in my story. So that's kind of what motivates me to push myself forward. And thanks to my body was yelling at me, shouting at me. It was like, just wake up. And that's what I did. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded response, but I did warn you.
No apologies necessary.
Okay.
One thing that you covered there, and it's definitely something that resonates with me and definitely with others, is that you were first going for the safer options. That teaching was a safer option, that it was more secure. And I feel that it's something that I usually see it in Irish culture. It's probably in UK culture. It's probably in most other cultures, especially Western culture, that we were raised to get a secure job and stay in that job for the next 40 years and don't raise your head. Just put your head into the books, get yourself a secure job and stay there for 40 years. And it's whenever you stick your head out and be like, you know what, I actually want to change and follow my passion. And everyone is very quick to jump and be like, no, you're going to ruin your life. You're going to ruin your life if you follow your passions. You have a secure job, stay there and don't stick your head up. And it's like, you want to follow your dreams. Like, again, you have one life, and are you going to regret it if you don't do it? But it comes from a place of people pleasing, I guess, as well. That you feel that if you are to stick your head up or raise your hand and say, I'm not happy with this anymore, and I want to follow my dreams or follow my passions, that people think that you're following a pipe dream and that you're better off, you're more secure if you stick with what you know.
Yes, that's what we're taught to believe, isn't it? That's part of many traditions, many cultures, not just Irish. It's it's quite embedded in many cultures. Tradition and the traditional way of doing things, the traditional way of approaching things, and but traditions are changing, traditions are evolving now, and everything is changing, and that has been quite evident in the last 3 years. So we are starting to question what is traditional now, aren't we? But we're still in that remnants. We still have that remnant of that traditional thinking. It's still in our culture, but it is breaking down, and we're seeing it with the new generation. We're evolving as human beings, as society, as cultural beings, and we're asking new questions, we're wanting new things, and we're really questioning the foundations of our prior existence. And what's coming out is very clearly that it's not working for some people. It's not making them happy. I'm not fulfilled. Before that wasn't even really a question. It was, but it was kind of internal and you didn't really express it more than that. And maybe just go back to, like you said, putting your head down and just getting on with it, because that's what you do in this life, isn't it? But now we are really starting to question, but is it? Is it? And all starts with a question. If we don't have a question, then we will continue that life that has been mapped out for us, but not mapped out by you. And that's the difference, because that's when you're living a life that's not yours, and that's where the pain hits. And that was my experience, that the pain, how painful it can be when, for whatever reason, you do not allow yourself to fully be in your life, to take ownership of your life. And it's so incredibly painful. And we pay a price for staying and living in that apparent safe zone, that secure zone, that mapped out zone. We pay a price. And for some people it can be huge. It can be huge. And for some it can affect the physical body, the psychological health, emotional health, and we're seeing an epidemic of mental health problems. And that just really goes to highlight many things. Above all, are we happy? And to many the answer is, I don't think so. I'm too sad to be happy. I feel empty, I feel numb, I feel like there's something missing. I'll stop there.
Yeah, one thing you covered there, especially with tradition, the tradition of our work culture, that we get that secure job and we stay in it for 40 years. But It's funny that we say tradition. That's probably been only in our tradition for the past 100, 200 years max. The industrial age, really, that brought in the having that set work shift per day and getting your weekly or monthly pay. That security only developed over the past 1 or 200 years, and that's seen as our tradition, our culture. That's how we live. But we are seeing the change now, uh, especially in the digital era, where people can work wherever they want. They have more freedom. They can get virtual assistants from anywhere in the world. They can start their own business from with very, very little capital. And the world is basically everyone's oyster. And it's the people who are holding on to traditions and resisting the change that just want you to put your head down and stay with them because they're too uncomfortable to break their tradition. And again, speaking about mental health, that's another big thing where people are like, oh, you don't talk about your mental health. That was something that I dealt a lot with, especially with Give Yourself Some Leeway. As soon as I started talking about my mental health, the negative backlash I got from that, I'd say about 20% of my feedback was positive. The rest was all, you can't talk about your mental health. That you'll get fired. If your employer finds out you're talking about your mental health in public and saying that you feel stressed at work, that's that's like career suicide. And I was like, I thought we were allowed to talk about our mental health. I think everyone should be able to talk about their mental health. If I get stressed at work, it's probably because I care about my job and I care about the work I do every day. So that's not negative and negatively impacting the company, me saying that I care about the work I do every day. It doesn't look bad on the company. It if anything, it shows, look, I really care about my job, but I know I can't do this alone. I'd really like some help with this. And I think more people need to reach out like that. And to receive negative feedback talking about that, it just went to show that a lot of people feel uncomfortable that they can't have that discussion, that there's no space there to have that discussion. And that was one thing I wanted to open up and get more people to just talk about it, discuss it, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your coworkers, and you'll find out that at least half of them are probably sharing the same feelings that you do.
Yeah, starting a new culture. And we're starting to see it that it is becoming more widely accepted to open up and share our inner world. In England, for example, if you're diagnosed at work with having anxiety or depression, your employer has to make reasonable accommodation for that, and that's become quite normal now. That you have to make reasonable allowances to accommodate people's difficult moments, and stress is a reality. And I like the way you brought stress as a positive sign, that I'm stressed because I really care about my work, and that really then can change people's idea about stress. That it's a positive, it's got a positive side to it, even though the reaction is that you're in overwhelm and you really need to redimension something that you're doing at work. And that's when we're together with other people. We have people in well-being in many sectors, coaching, are in various sectors in the workplace, and they're people there to help you to really understand the stress, what are the triggers, and how to work with those triggers and understand how to alleviate the stress, to bring you back into balance, to raise your energy, to boost your energy. It's all about getting back into balance. When you're out of balance, to ignore it, it's dangerous, isn't it? You're playing with your health, and that ultimately is going to affect your work. So why wouldn't you talk about it? And I think bringing that as a new idea into the workforce, it's going to rapidly change the culture of work and our approach to talking about our mental and emotional difficulties, because we're human beings, and we are we can't deny that we have an emotional being, you know, that we have thoughts, and to share them and to elaborate them are only can be our strengths in our personal life and in our professional life. Obviously, it doesn't become the central point of our work, but to give time to it elaborates many other things. Because once you start talking about how you're feeling, how you're thinking, new ideas come to the forefront, creative ideas. It's when you start talking that those ideas can really start to come about, and then those ideas can be applied to whatever work you do. And if they're shared amongst colleagues, those ideas can ultimately be new resources, solutions to new problems that arise. So interact with it in a creative way, in a constructive way. Absolutely. Yeah. So what you're doing is absolutely great, starting this new revolution of not being afraid to really express what's really happening inside of you, what's happening in your inner world, because it's ultimately affecting your outer world. And like it or not, it's like that. So give it light, bring it out, share it. And it takes one courageous person to start that, doesn't it? It's like a domino effect. And then you influence, you inspire another person, and it grows and grows and grows and grows. And that's how we push those boundaries and develop new cultures. And yeah, I'm all for that.
I love that you used the domino effect right there, because just recently I was reading The One Thing by Gary Keller. Again, are you familiar with The One Thing?
No, I don't think so. No.
So it's The One Thing. He was working in a very stressful environment, businessman, and he was trying to deal with his workload, and he came up with this thing. Instead of trying to deal with everything, all the tasks coming in all the time, he was like, what's the one thing that if I do right now will make everything else easier to do or unnecessary? And I did a book review on it, let's say about my key takeaways from the book. And the first one is focusing on the one thing. That you focus on what's the one thing that I can do right now that will make everything else easier to do or unnecessary. So when it came to people talking about, basically giving me negative feedback about, oh, I'm not comfortable with you talking about your mental health, because it wasn't like they were trying to just shut me up. It was because it made them feel like they weren't addressing their own emotions that they were bottling up, and they felt that by me bringing it up, that it was putting them into this uncomfortable space where they felt that, oh, do I have to talk about my mental health now? Or is he bringing up these emotions that, yes, I resonate with them, but I'm not comfortable actually, letting my manager or my colleagues know that I'm struggling with this? And by opening that space for discussion, it does get people talking. And then that was the next thing, is the domino effect or the ripple effect, that by pushing that one small domino, it's going to have a cascading effect where it's going to ripple through an organization. It's going to eventually change the culture. If you get enough people talking about something, it's going to start trending. It's going to go viral, and eventually it will have a lasting effect. So I just found it really interesting that you used the word domino effect, because that's exactly what happens. You pick one small thing, and that one small thing for me was starting the conversation, putting it up in the podcast and broadcasting it so that people were able to just scroll through their newsfeed and go like, oh, you know what? I'll have a listen to that conversation. I'll have a look at that reel. I'll have a look at that thread. And from there, my next small thing was, who else can I talk about this with? Has anyone else ever experienced stress in the workplace? Has anyone else ever burnt out? Has anyone else ever struggled with their mental health? Because I know for sure I can't be the only one. And just by having those conversations and sharing those stories, people can relate to them and eventually see that it's normal to talk about your mental health, and normalize those conversations in the workplace, at home, with your friends. So that was mindset when I first read the book. I'd say it's about 2 or 3 years ago now. And it's only recently I was going through what were the most, let's say, the most impactful books that I had in my self-development. And that they weren't shelf development books as they're normally read, put on the shelf, and no action ever taken, but actually taking a book, reading through it, and actually taking the actions that the author wants you to take in the first place. And so the one thing is one that I always come back to, because it's such a simple philosophy. What's the one thing? Sometimes it's the most ridiculous, simple thing that I can do right now, that if I do it the right way, that it makes everything else in my life easier to do or unnecessary.
Yeah, sort of about taking that action, because that's often the part that's missing. It's like you can hear lots of podcasts, you can read loads of books, and then it's in your head. It's like, I get it, I understand. Then it may pass into your feeling. You might feel it intensely, but then if it doesn't go through your limbs, through your body, and get you moving, that's, the will to be in movement, to transform those ideas, those feelings into action, because that's the big step, to transfer that knowing, that feeling into an action, into a concrete action. So to get the idea into the physical world and transform the physical world through your actions, through your behaviors, through the things that you do in your everyday life, that, making those changes, because you can't change anything if you don't make change. It's all about change, but what do you change? How do I change it? Understanding what needs to be changed is obviously the first question to ask yourself. And like you said before, it all started with asking myself questions. Am I the only one suffering with this? Does anybody else suffer with it? Those questions really start getting the ball rolling, and then getting you really engaged with the question, and you get enthusiastic about it. It warms you up internally, and it inspires you to then interact with the response. And what you've been doing is that movement that came from those questions. So it's always, I always say to my clients, it's asking the right questions, which give you the opportunity in responding to take you one step further to the answer. And the answer is always different for everybody. There isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, and that's the beauty of it. It's always personalized, the response.
Yes, I love that people are always looking for the right answers. And I always tell them that 9 times out of 10, they already have the answers themselves. The answers are already within them, but they just haven't been asking themselves the right questions. And
Exactly.
A lot of people kind of get stumped by that, and they're like, it's like, oh, well, you were a great help. I wanted the answer to the question, but yeah. It's like, you're just not asking the right questions. And if you ask the right questions, you'll find it yourself. And a lot of the time, though, the right questions have the most uncomfortable answers. And yes, you know it yourself already, but you don't want to tell yourself those answers. You don't want to tell yourself what you don't want to answer the right questions, because it can be very deep and it can be very personal. But sometimes most of the time, that's the action that needs to be taken.
Yes, we don't often answer those questions, because when you become conscious of the responses, it takes a lot of effort, conscious effort, a lot of courage to really get out of that, what I call autopilot living, which in a way seems easier because you know what to do, you just get on with it. But then if you question it, then you're going to have to make some radical change. Well, maybe not radical, maybe minor changes, but generally bigger the changes, bigger the end result. And that takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and a lot of strength, a lot of courage. And I think sometimes we know that, so we're not ready sometimes to ask that question, because if we do ask that question and we get those answers, then, you know, they're saying ignorance is bliss. Because when you know certain things, then you're not in peace anymore. It's like something you know so deeply, you can actually see it, and you can't hide it anymore. Because if you do, it will be an eternal pain that you bring within yourself day after day. And yeah, if you were lucky like me, it could really hit hard in like I mentioned before, like an illness, which thanks to that illness, you know, I've heard many people have certain illnesses and that has been the wake-up call, but thanks to that, it's like a real loud wake-up call, like shouting internally. So I always thank that moment, you know, that illness, because it was thanks to that illness that I plucked the courage and the strength and the attitude. I've got nothing to lose. I'm all in. I'm all in, whatever the consequences. And yeah, it was scary, really scary. Well, I didn't mention, but I don't have that lung disease anymore. I don't know where it went, just disappeared. And that's one of many other illnesses that I've had, and my body's it does the most weirdest things sometimes. I also had this growth. Sorry, I'm talking a lot about my health today. Had this growth come out on my neck. It was a cyst that as a child I had cut out. And I didn't choose to have that cut out because I was only 11, so I didn't make that choice. But it was interesting that it came back even louder, in that it was much bigger at 35. And that's when I was like, okay, you want to tell me something. And this part in yogic traditions is to do with communication. So there was something that I was not saying. And when we talk about communication, it's about speaking the truth. So I wasn't being truthful. And this thing, like a golf ball size, came out of my throat. And the doctor says, we have to take it out. And I was like, no, I'll leave it. Thank you. And I addressed what this lump was saying to me. Yet again, it wasn't easy. And it went back in. It was incredible. And those experiences again and again really show me how incredible our bodies are at talking to us. But the question is, are we really listening?
When you were in your teaching years, was that a matter of, when you were teaching, were you living on autopilot? Because I think that was something that I experienced as well when before I burnt out, that I had such a heavy workload and I had so much extra, let's say, responsibilities and commitments in my life that I was just going through the motions and I was just on autopilot. I wasn't actually thinking about my day-to-day tasks. It was just going through the motions, eat, work, sleep, repeat, the likes. And I had this kind of moment of realization at one point where I was like, I'm just going through the motions of day to day and letting life pass me by, but I'm not 100% happy with what I'm doing, or this isn't aligning with where my values are. If I take a step back, I'm like, this is not where I want to see myself in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So why am I just going through the motions right now? Is that what being an autopilot was like for you?
So when I started teaching, for me it was, and it still is, a profoundly enriching experience working with others, working with a true sense of education. And I might talk about that later. But just doing that and projecting myself in the future as just doing that, it was this, I'll give you the image of a tree that is going through this ramification, and the teaching is always at the core of what I do. At the heart, education. When I talk about teaching, I talk about education, and that takes on different forms. And it was not allowing that transformation of the teaching work, of the educational work, to move into other careers. That's where I could have been on autopilot if I didn't allow that ramification, because I had so many interests, so many passions, so many things I want to do. I'd always been like that. I'd always been active in lots of hobbies, lots of interests, dance, theatre, helping people, work gardening. Culture was a huge interest of mine. I went into events management, and then all my dance work, coaching, and that wouldn't have happened if I just remained full-time in education as a teacher. And that would have meant being on autopilot and just living the next 20, 30 years repeating, even though you don't repeat the same day when you're in education, because you're with human beings. But what I mean is going to the same place, the same building, and you could be there for 20, 30 years quite easily. And for some people, that's how it is, and it's just not questioned. But no, I realized that I wouldn't be in one place for 20, 30 years. And I would move my career and reinvent myself continuously. I knew it, but I might not have been doing it at that time when, certain things were happening. And my body then started to show me that, okay, you need to get moving more. There's a lot more for you to do in this life. So get moving. It's like, get moving. And yes, so I did. So I did get moving. And the educational work moves through different careers now. And for me, it's all part of the same tree, but it just has different aspects to it. It takes on different forms, but it's all related to education. And what education is, in its deeper sense, is to pull out, draw out what lives within and bring it to the light. So that's the work of an educator, to really help others to bring to light what lives within. And I always say it's like this jewel, this hidden jewel that each and every one of us brings with us, and it's hidden away, and it's our I would say part of why we're here, to really understand this gift that we have, this jewel, and bring it to the light, however difficult it may be. But yes, that is one of the things that we are brought here to do in this life. So as an educator, we help others to draw out that light, that inner light, those inner passions, those things that you love doing, what you're good at, what you're meant to be doing, and help others to actually do it and share it with others. And in doing that, in sharing with others those gifts that you bring, you inspire others to do the same. Going back to that domino effect. Like, people say to me, "You're so brave." I'm like, why? Because that's another thing I didn't mention. I was working as a school leader, which is ultimately a school principal, a few years back, and I resigned from, and that's quite a prestigious role, resigning from a school leadership role. And people say, "You're very brave." I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like, yeah, all crazy, but yes,
It was leaving that position of security that everyone sees as the epitome of your education or your career as a teacher, to be in that lead role, Because that's something that I've actually that word people say, "Oh, wow, you're so brave." And I experienced something like that very, very similar very recently, where people were like, "Oh, wow, you're making this big decision. That's so brave." And I was like, what they're really trying to say is, "Well, you're an idiot. If I was in your position, I definitely wouldn't be doing that." But they just go like, "Oh, wow, that's a really, really brave thing to do." And I know exactly what they mean, but I know what they really mean is that if they were in my shoes, they wouldn't do it. But I know that they're not in my shoes. That I see things from a different
Exactly.
perspective, and yes, I have different goals and I have different values to them at the end of the day. And I know as soon as they say, "Oh, wow, you're so brave," I'm like, "Yes, I am. I'm very brave because I'm following my path." And yes, there's a lot of responsibility, and there's a lot of sacrifice and discipline that goes with that as well. But it's me following my path, and I'd regret it if I didn't do it. But yeah, that's definitely it was like, "Oh, wow, you're so brave." Leaving your position of as a leader, that's like a principal position in teaching, to follow your dream. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that a lot of people envy. I think you were uh, getting that sense of freedom that they probably will never, or are very unlikely to follow.
Yeah, that keyword responsibility. We have a responsibility to ourselves to be honest with ourselves. And, I through those experiences of continuously letting go of those comforts, that letting go of the familiarity, the security, and what ultimately is starting up again, recreating yourself, recreating another career, recreating another business. It's all about pushing boundaries, really opening up to new possibilities. And yeah, that's courageous, takes a lot of creativity, takes a lot of energy. But I see the results that when you take that responsibility to really be on fire with your life, to what I call to live and to be extraordinary in what you do. So that's what's inspired me now to do what I'm doing now, to support others to do exactly the same. Other people that come with those questions. It's like, I'm just not happy. And they ask themselves what it is that they're really here, what they're meant to be doing. Some people know, some people really don't know. They don't know the amazing gifts they have. They don't sometimes see their own strengths. So I always say to them, go and ask a very good friend, what are your strengths? Um, what you're good at. And sometimes they may be things that you don't see yourself being good at something or seeing those strengths that others see. But it's always interesting to really see from another perspective because others see you in a different way. And that's why coaching has become such a booming industry, as we know. It is booming because it's helping others to really unpeel those layers by asking those right questions that you mentioned before, and helping others to really get to the core of the answer of those questions. So keep unpeeling, unveiling till you get to your own truth. And what you do with that truth is the exciting part. What lives within you and what form will it take, and how will you mold and shape yourself into that future, that destiny that's waiting for you. And I couldn't think of anything more beautiful, more inspiring, more meaningful to do in my life, to help others, to to lead them, to hold their hands, and to really bring them out of themselves and recreate themselves, and to be on fire with their life. to live a life of meaning and connection and just being alive.
And is that what it
On
means
fire.
to be extraordinary?
Exactly. Exactly. To be extraordinary. Yes.
So these are, let's say, your program is also about being extraordinary. Is this what people will get if they follow your program?
Yes. People come on the Be Extraordinary program to be extraordinary. And they do not leave until they are extraordinary. And it's a 12-week program, and it's incredible the transformation that happens in a very short time, because 12 weeks is a long time in reality. But the transformation is incredible as one starts at the beginning, and how one develops in those 3 months, those 12 weeks, is incredible. It's igniting that spark and bringing to life what lives within, and really coming into contact and understanding deeply what I'm meant to be doing in this life. And then it just creates so much enthusiasm for life. When you get that vision, you see you and understand you and what you are meant to be doing in this life, which you might not be doing it in the actual moment. But the fact that it has been dormant for so long, and we awaken it through the program, and it becomes alive, this vision becomes so deeply embedded in our thoughts, in our hearts, and inspires us to move towards that vision and to remold ourselves. And there's a lot of work with recreating our habits, creating new life-sustaining habits, and looking at the way we think and feel about ourselves and the world, and to really understand how these behaviors, the actions that we have that were on autopilot, where they came from. And my coaching work and in my educational work, it's always the case that the thoughts, the ideas, the beliefs, the feelings that we have come from, ultimately, from the first 7 years of our life. And they are beliefs that we have inherited. We brought them on board without realizing it, and have ultimately created the person that you are today. And when you become really aware of the mechanisms that brought you to where you are today, and realize that it's not bringing you towards where you want to be, the work is to really remold that thinking, remold that feeling, and remold those actions, behaviors. So we really get into an incredible journey of recreating life-sustaining habits. And as I mentioned before, I have many different interests, and I bring all that into my work. So there's a lot of dancing going on, meditation, yoga, and a lot of movement. I push a lot for movement, because it's the movement that gets everything else moving. So the Be Extraordinary program is dynamic and a lot of fun, I must say.
And if people are interested in finding out more about the Be Extraordinary program, or just getting in touch with you, what's the best place for them to get in touch?
Via my website, www.luciadimarco.com. Also on social media, also find me. Going to my website, you'll find my social media there. I'm just about to launch a new ebook, actually. So I think that will be out by the time this podcast goes live. So I recommend that read, 5 strategies to live an extraordinary life. It's a very practical
Amazing.
book, actually. It's very practical. So that's going to be out there soon. But yeah, by my website.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks, Lucy.
Great.
Great having you here on the show. And yeah, it was great chatting with you.
Thank you. It was wonderful chatting with you, and I think we could just chat for hours and hours and hours, couldn't we? But we did say, I did mention we have to be careful about that. Bit of a talker. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting, profound, and luminous conversation. So thank you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
of course.